And he's living on the inside, roaring like a lion, like God is not dead. He's surely alive, and he's living on the inside, roaring like a lion, like God is not dead. He's surely alive.
I am continuing in my sermon series on taking a stand. This morning's sermon is entitled "Standing Alone." Our scripture text is found in 1 Kings, chapter 18, verse 18. The day before Thanksgiving, an elderly man in Phoenix called his son in New York, and he said to him, "I hate to ruin your day, but I have to tell you that your mother and I are divorcing. 45 years of misery is enough. We're sick of each other. And so call your sister in Chicago and tell her." Frantic, the son called his sister, who exploded over the phone. "They are not getting divorced. I'll take care of this." And she called Phoenix immediately and said to her father, "You are not getting divorced. Don't do a single thing until I get there. I'm calling my brother back. We'll both see you there tomorrow. Until then, don't you do a thing. Do you hear me?" The man hung up his phone and turned to his wife. "Okay, honey. The kids are coming for Thanksgiving. And they're paying for their own flights." I guess he felt like he needed to shake things up a little bit to get his kids to remember what was important. Sometimes we get so caught up in life that we forget the important things. The people of Israel had been so caught up in their lives and worshiping false gods that Elijah saw a desperate need to shake things up, to demonstrate that God isn't dead, that they needed to get right with God, that Israel needed to be a holy nation unto the Lord. Look at your scripture text, if you would. 1 Corinthians, keep saying what to say Corinthians. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 18. We're going to back up a little bit to verse 16. Excuse me, it's smaller print. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you troublemaker? You troubler of Israel?" Has anyone ever said that to you? "What are you doing here, you troublemaker?" I don't want to know. Elijah says, "I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your family, father's family sure have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent word throughout all of Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." When you're standing alone, sometimes you can find that you are standing in a crowd. You can't stand alone in a crowd. The big difference between being in a crowded room and being in a crowded room full of people you know is significant. Elijah was one of the last. Elijah was one of the last of the Lord's prophets. You see, Jezebel. How many people have you ever known named Jezebel? Raise your hand. You knew a person? Okay. How many of you know people whose names should have been Jezebel? Okay. Usually because Jezebel in the Bible was so wicked, people don't name their children Jezebel. But Jezebel was as evil can be. I mean, she was married to Ahab, and Ahab was evil. But Jezebel made Ahab look like an amateur. Ahab went to Jezebel. Ahab went to Jezebel for advice on how to be evil. And so you have Jezebel, and she's no friend of God. She was killing off the prophets of God, according to 1 Kings 18:4. So much the case that Obadiah was hiding at least 100 of the prophets from her in 2 different caves. At least that way, if one cave was found, maybe the prophets in the other one would survive. And so he was hiding out these 100 prophets. And Jezebel, she was so accustomed to evil that she ate regularly with 850 prophets of Asherah and Baal. 850. Now that's a big dinner table. By the time you say pass the gravy, it's been long empty by that time. But it says that they eat at her table regularly. Elijah stood alone against these 850 false prophets. When he went up on Mount Carmel and confronted them, the other 100 prophets stayed hidden in the caves. They were afraid for their lives. All of Israel had been brought up to Mount Carmel. Now, this wasn't just an event that you see advertised on TV. Hey, come on out to the expo show and see what we have in the latest RVs and hunting equipment and kitchenwares and new home supplies, whatever type of convention it may be. Everyone come out and free admission, come and check things out. No, it was mandated by the king. Everyone come to Mount Carmel. You had no choice in the matter. So you had all of Israel, and we're talking millions, gathered up on Mount Carmel. And Elijah stood alone against these 850 prophets. The mountain was crowded, but Elijah stood alone. Often a Christian can stand alone in a full room, especially if you are alone in the faith. Obviously, the best way to fix that is to tell them about Jesus. But for the Christian in the secular world, it can seem very lonely. But whether you stand with a church or stand where 2 or 3 are gathered, or if you stand alone, brothers and sisters, you have to stand. You have to stand for God. It makes no difference how great the opposition is. It makes no difference who is with you or not with you. You have to stand for God. What is right never depends on the crowd unless it's a game show. I haven't watched it in a long time, but I remember the game show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And he always had these lifelines. And one of the lifelines was to ask the crowd, ask the audience. And you know what? The audience didn't always get it right. They sometimes got it wrong. You can't look to popular opinion in the crowd to know what's right and wrong. to find out what's right and wrong, you look here. Or you ask, you get another lifeline and make a phone call. And you ask an expert. Okay. Elijah, though, he stood alone. He was not alone in the crowd. All of Israel was gathered on Mount Carmel. And if later on we find out that God says that there are 7,000 who have yet to kiss Baal, who have yet to give themselves over to Baal. So certainly they probably had been in the crowd, but I seriously doubt if they were saying, "Go Elijah, go Elijah, go Elijah." They were probably keeping to themselves. We see that the crowd, though, turned with the demonstration of God's power. For hours upon hours, all day long, the prophets of Baal had their sacrifice placed on the altar, and they were praying for Baal or Asherah or whoever to ignite the fire, to ignite the sacrifice. And they were in a frenzy trying to get this to happen. They weren't eating, and they were chanting, and they were dancing, and they were cutting themselves. They were so frantic trying to get their false god to light this altar. And Elijah, he was off to the side saying, "Hey, try to be louder. Maybe he can't hear you. You know, do a little bit better. You know, dance a little bit stronger. Try a disco dance, whatever it takes." Okay, he didn't say that, but he's over there kind of ridiculing them on the side because he knows that altar is not going to be lit. And then he has 12 stones put together to make an altar representing the 12 tribes of Israel. He has the wood stacked. He has the sacrifice put on. He has a moat dug around the altar. And then he continually drenches the sacrifice in water until the moat that was dug around the altar is full and is overflowing. And then he prays to God, "God, show him who's boss. God, show him who is God." And fire comes from heaven above, and it consumes the sacrifice. It consumes the wood. It consumes every drop of water that was in the moat. And the people were astounded. And it says in verse 39, when all the people saw this, they fell prostrate, there we go, and cried, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Then Elijah commanded them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away." And they seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. The people made a choice. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. But they were very fickle. It was a fickle choice. And Elijah found himself once again standing alone, but this time standing alone in a crisis. Elijah's world caved in. He went from one of the greatest triumphs of his life to his deepest grief. The false prophets were dead. Israel seemed to have turned back to God. He was victorious in his contest. He had ended the drought that had been on the land. Surely this was the greatest turning point. But it all came to naught when Jezebel threatened his life. You can have anything and everything going for you in your life. And just like that, it can turn around on you.